Let's start with the bad and slowly work our way toward the stuff of nightmares. Number 10. The Rat Dungeon. If you were alive in medieval London, you would have definitely heard horrifying whispers about the dreaded Rat Dungeon, a punishment so terrifying that even hardened criminals trembled at the thought of it. This dungeon was hidden deep beneath the Tower of London, a pitch-black chamber where prisoners were shackled and abandoned in total darkness. But what made it truly horrifying was not the lack of light, nor the chains, nor even the isolation. It was its location. The cell sat just below the waterline of the nearby river. Whenever the water level rose, the rats living along the riverbed were flushed out of their burrows and forced downstream, straight into the dungeon's only entrance. To the unlucky prisoner, there was no warning except the first soft, barely noticeable scurry of tiny feet echoing through the darkness, then more and more, until hundreds of rats swarmed around him, unseen but felt everywhere. Blind, hungry, and agitated, they crawled over the prisoner, nipping and biting at exposed skin. He could shake them off for a while, but eventually exhaustion took over, and while he slept, the rats continued chewing. He would awaken to find his body covered in bite, and this torment continued for days, or weeks, depending on his crime. By the end of the medieval period, the rat dungeon evolved from punishment into execution. Prisoners were simply thrown in and forgotten, left to be slowly consumed alive. Number 9. The Rack. Another infamous torture of the London Tower was the rack, used across centuries to extract confessions from criminals, slaves, and prisoners of war. It looked like a massive wooden ladder, except its steps were rolling spindles. A prisoner lay on this device, with their wrists and ankles tied to a ratcheting pulley system. Two officials slowly turned the handles, pulling the limbs tighter and tighter, placing unbearable strain on every joint, shoulders, elbows, hips, knees. Every turn dislocated another joint, ripping tendons and ligaments. The goal was always the same: extract information, but truth meant nothing. If the prisoner confessed, they were accused of lying. If they maintained innocence, they were tortured further for refusing to cooperate. When released, survivors were often paralyzed for life. One of the most tragic victims was Anne Askew, a 25-year-old English woman, tortured in She was stretched on the rack for hours until every joint in her body dislocated. Too broken to stand, she was carried to the stake and burned alive. Her crime: reading and sharing Bible passages privately with women she refused to name, even under torture. In those days, practicing any faith outside Catholic doctrine, even in your own home, even with your own husband, meant death, and it was her husband who turned her in. Number 8. Keel hauling. Now we move to the sea, where discipline was as brutal as the waves themselves. Keel hauling was a maritime punishment that almost always ended in death. A sailor accused of theft, insubordination, or violent conduct had his wrists tied with rope that looped around the entire hull of the ship before being fastened to his feet. Then he was thrown overboard. The crew hauled on the rope, dragging the sailor under the ship, scraping him across the barnacle-encrusted keel. Barnacles acted like serrated knives, shredding skin and muscle. Many sailors drowned before they even reached the keel. For those who survived the first pass, the outcomes were grim. A second pass that guaranteed death, release back onto the ship, only to die from infection or survival, but permanently scarred head to toe, mocked as barnacle backs for the rest of their lives. Number 7. Crushed by elephant. Now we enter the territory where survival isn't an option. The punishment of being crushed by elephants was used across many regions in history, but most recently in 19th century India, which is shockingly recent. Your great-grandmother could have witnessed one. Crimes deserving this horrific fate ranged widely: tax evasion, theft, being a captured enemy, or simply angering the wrong noble. The fourth Mughal emperor infamously ordered hundreds executed in a single day, purely out of boredom. The man who forgot to pay taxes, crushed. The man who stole an apple, crushed. The orphan who jaywalked, crushed. The murderer who cooked his neighbor into soup and fed it to the family, he was spared. Apparently he made good soup. Execution by elephant always involved a handler guiding the beast to showcase elite power. In the merciful method, the criminal's head was placed on a pedestal, crushed instantly, but the crueler version forced the elephant to walk across the entire body. Sometimes it crushed only a leg first, requiring multiple passes. The worst version involved a trained elephant methodically crushing limbs, one by one, then stabbing wounds with its tusks before delivering the final blow. Number 6. Impalement. one of the most grotesque forms of punishment ever devised, used most recently in 17th century Egypt. Highway robbers, grave thieves, and rebels suffered this horrifying fate. The criminal was tied face down with arms bound behind the back. A razor sliced open the lower body to widen the entry point, and a thick, sharpened wooden stake, greased beforehand, was forced inside. Workers hammered the stake deeper until it emerged from the shoulder, mouth or head. The body was then erected upright along a busy roadway, as a warning. If that wasn't horrific enough, another version involved impaling the criminal just deep enough to keep them alive for hours or even days. Special stakes, with a seat, prevented slipping. Victims remained conscious, begging passing travelers for help as they slowly died. Number 5. Poena coli, the leather sack. This punishment was reserved exclusively for one category of criminal, someone who murdered a family member. First recorded in ancient Rome, later adopted by various German states in the 18th century, poena coli began deceptively simple. The murderer was sewn inside a thick, leather sack, but he wasn't placed in there alone. To ensure maximum terror, a dog, a rooster, a viper, and a monkey were thrown in as well. None of these animals deserved such a cruel fate, but they were chosen specifically because they panic violently when confined. With the sack sealed almost airtight, the animals clawed, bit, and thrashed in total darkness. But this wasn't the end. Once the sack was secured, it was thrown into a river, or the sea. Later variations gave murderers a choice: death in the sack, or public execution in the Colosseum, where they were mauled to death for the entertainment of the crowd. At least there, they could see their executioner coming. Number 4. The rat bowl and the tube. One of the most depraved forms of torture in human history involved weaponizing rats. The first confirmed use dates back to 1568, during the 80 Years' War, by Dutch commander Diederik Sonoy. A rat was placed inside a clay or metal bowl, which was overturned onto a prisoner's stomach, chest or groin. Hot coals or fire were applied to the back of the bowl, heating the metal. In panic, the rat attempted to flee. Its only escape was downward, into the victim's flesh. It clawed, chewed, and burrowed in desperate terror until it escaped out the other side. But the second version, used secretly by dictator Augusto Pinochet in the late 1970s and early 1980s, was far worse. Called the rectoscope. It involved inserting a tube into the victim's lower body and forcing a rat into the tube. The rat, terrified and trapped, burrowed inward. Prisoners were forced to answer questions while this happened. Many never returned, disappearing during the dictator's reign. Number 3. Gibbeting, human cages. The most recent confirmed use occurred in the early 1900s in Afghanistan, but gibbeting existed worldwide, including colonial America. Boston Harbor once displayed pirates hung in iron cages, as warnings to approaching sailors. England, however, perfected the practice. After the Murder Act of 1752, all convicted murderers were required to be publicly dissected or gibbeted. Over 13,400 people met this fate. Human-shaped, steel cages were built to tightly encase the body, preventing movement. The prisoner was hung 30 feet in the air above public roads or water sources, ensuring maximum visibility and maximum torment for civilians forced to hear the dying beg for water. After death, the body remained in the cage, rotting for years. Locals frequently complained that the smell of decay was so overwhelming they couldn't sleep. In some cases, remains sat in cages for more than 20 years before officials bothered to remove them. Number 2. Scaphism, the boat. Perhaps the slowest and most nightmarish execution ever created. Scaphism was practiced in the Persian Empire for murderers. The victim was placed inside a hollowed wooden boat, with only their head, arms and legs exposed. They were force-fed massive quantities of milk and honey until violently sick, and their entire body was coated in milk and honey to attract insects. The boat was pushed onto a lake under the blazing sun. This combination caused extreme diarrhea, filling the boat with filth that attracted swarms of flies, wasps, ants, roaches, and worms. They devoured the victim alive over days. Every morning, executioners returned to force-feed another round of milk and honey, ensuring the torture continued. Rodents often attempted to burrow inside the victim from below the boat. Historical accounts describe victims surviving more than 2 weeks. One man lived 117 days, his face entirely covered in wasps, his flesh rotting, crawling with worms, screaming until he finally fell silent. This punishment was designed not just to kill, but to destroy every last shred of humanity in the process. Number 1. The oubliette dungeon. Oubliette means to forget, and that is exactly what happened to anyone thrown inside one. Used across Europe, including the Tower of London's infamous Little E's, oubliettes were narrow, pitch black, stone chambers not large enough to stand, sit, or lie down. Prisoners were forced to remain in painful contorted positions for days. Some oubliettes were even worse. The one beneath Warwick Castle was a coffin-tight shaft, sealed with a metal door. Prisoners were thrown in, and left to die of thirst, starvation or madness. Sadly, many were not alone. Often a corpse from the previous prisoner already lay inside, decaying. Rats infested these dungeons, having long developed a taste for human flesh, but the true horror comes from the mass graves discovered in modern times. In Leap Castle, Ireland, renovations in 1900 revealed a hidden shaft filled with so many skeletons that multiple cartloads were required to remove them. Some prisoners survived for years, slowly deteriorating, hearing laughter from the world above, laughter they would